Founded in the 1600s, the East India Company was the largest trading company in its time. India produced pepper for the company and later began farming tea, which grew to be one of the most profitable trades. During the 18th century, the East India Company adopted a more military-style approach to gain more power. It was then they moved into Punjab and encountered resistance from Maharaja Ranjit Singh. In the early years of the 19th century, the Sikh Raj of Punjab was transformed and expanded by Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Immediately after the death of Ranjit Singh, the East India Company began increasing its military strength in the regions of Punjab. During their time in India, they acquired various artefacts, including those of Sikh origin. When the company dissolved, many of these artefacts were handed over to Queen Victoria. However, soon after they started work, they found they were running out of space and began distributing the artefacts to various museums across England. Today, we find ourselves at the Royal Armouries Museum here in Leeds, where many of the military items were sent. We'll be meeting with Natasha Bennett, the acting curator here at the museum, who will take us through their open collection as well as giving us an exclusive look at their private collection.
I'm Natasha Bennett. I'm the acting curator of the Oriental collection here at the Royal Armouries Museum based in Leeds. I'm standing in our main Oriental gallery, which houses our Indian collection. We're extremely lucky at the Royal Armouries because we have a very extensive Indian collection, most of which came to the museum in the mid-19th century as a result of two major acquisitions. One of these was a very large gift from the East India Company, and the other was a substantial series of acquisitions made after the 1851 Great Exhibition. During the mid-19th century, the Tower was pursuing a policy of improving the academic rigour and breadth of its displays, so it was extremely concerned over the careful documentation and detail that went into collecting the Indian pieces. A significant influence over these 19th century acquisitions was caused by the British annexation of the Punjab after the Anglo-Sikh Wars of the 1840s. A lot of the material from the Sikh arsenals and armouries ended up being inventoried by British occupying forces and returned to England as part of the East India Company gift and to be put on display for the Great Exhibition. And a lot of this material now resides in the Armouries collection. I'm standing in front of the elephant armour, which is one of the prize pieces in the Royal Armouries collection. It's the largest armour for an animal that's on show in a public museum anywhere in the world. The armour is made from a mail and plate construction, and it's composed of 8 main panels, although unfortunately 2 of the panels on the side of the elephant that's behind me are missing. Armoured elephants were a popular part of armies used throughout the Indian subcontinent. We believe that this armour was manufactured around the beginning of the 17th century, probably in an arsenal in the north of India. I'm standing next to a collection of armour pieces that by tradition have been associated with Maharaja Ranjit Singh. The armour is composed of a cuirass made up of 4 plates, 2 arm defences known as dastana, and a helmet. These pieces were brought back from India by Lord Hardinge, who was Governor-General during the Anglo-Sikh Wars, and they were deposited at the Tower of London by his descendant, Lord Hardinge of Penshurst, in 1955. By tradition, they are associated with Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and although we have no way of proving this association, many believe that they are. By the mid-19th century, the Sikh army had established a phenomenal reputation. Ranjit Singh had built up a very effective military machine that was based around a core of a professional army, armed and trained along European lines. One crucial element was the Sardars, who were mounted warriors, famous for their skill with the lance and the sword. Here we have a helmet with a skull that is fashioned to take account of the very recognisable Sikh turban. It's beautifully gilded to show the richness of the armour that the Sardars usually donned before taking to the battlefield, and it's accompanied by this aventail of very fine butted male links made out of iron and brass. The Sardars prided themselves on their skill with the sword, which was a very traditional weapon, and the Sikhs were well known for making outstanding quality blades. This type of sword is usually referred to as a talwar. It's got a very typical Indo-Muslim style hilt, which was used throughout India, and this very beautiful curved blade, which is fashioned from watered or crucible steel. In addition to their sword and their lance, the Sardars were often equipped with matchlock muskets. There are many paintings from around this time which depict warriors shooting these long guns very effectively from horseback, and these were often used in preference to shorter firearms such as pistols, which, even though they were provided and used on the Sikh battlefield, they weren't anywhere near as prevalent, as far as we're aware, as these traditional long-style matchlocks. This piece is particularly nice because it's still equipped with its original match cord wound around the butt, and it's still got its original vent pricker here, which was used to clean out the touch hole. Part of the equipment that was needed to use these firearms effectively on the battlefield was this belt with its accompanying powder horn and pouches for bullets. These were referred to as kamar. Another very traditional weapon that's associated with Sikh horsemen is this composite bow. These were used across India and indeed across the whole of Asia, and they're constructed from wood, horn and sinew, which gives them amazing strength and elasticity so that they have an enormous range. This particular example is very highly decorated, suggesting that it was probably used as a weapon of pleasure, probably more for hunting. When the Punjab was annexed after the Anglo-Sikh Wars of the 1840s, the British occupying forces took inventories of everything that they found in the Toshkhana, or the Sikh jewel house and treasury, including a detailed list compiled by Dr. Logan of all the arms and armour that he found there. Dr. Logan divided much of this list up into the people who had owned the individual sets of arms and armour. Many of the entries are repeated too often, and the details aren't specific enough for us to be able to identify individual pieces or particular owners. For example, this matchlock musket here came to the Tower as part of the East India Company gift, but matchlock muskets were mentioned too often for us to have any clear idea about whether this belonged to a particular person. However, we do have a near contemporary source of the catalogue that was compiled by the armour historian John Hewitt in 1859, and the way that he lays out his catalogue of the Indian collection suggests very, very strongly that he was copying verbatim from these original documents. And from that, we can deduce that individual pieces, which are clearly identified by their descriptions and tally with the one entry in Logan's inventory and the one entry in Dalhousie's list, suggests that we can trace certain pieces back potentially to their original owners. So this composite bow and this powder flask, for example, we do have pretty strong indications that they may have had personal associations with Maharaja Ranjit Singh. This powder flask may be the one that is specifically listed by Dalhousie as having been made to order in the Toshkhana, specifically for the wedding of Maharaja Ranjit Singh's eldest son, Kuruk Singh, in 1838. Similarly, there is only one painted spear listed in the Logan inventory, and only one painted spear that came over as part of the East India Company gift in 1853. So from that evidence, we think that there is a distinct possibility that this painted spear that I have next to me was the property of Sardar Jawala Singh, who was one of the commanders of the Sikh army and was an adherent of Maharaja Sher Singh. His property was part of the contents of the Toshkhana that was listed by Logan in 1849. Another very prominent group within the Sikh armies of the mid-19th century, who were probably even more famous than the very flamboyant, colourful Sardars, were the Akali Nihangs. These were a group of religious warriors who took the 10th Guru, Guru Gobind Singh's entreaty to carry arms at all times to the absolute extreme. Contemporary British reports suggest repetitively that these warriors were armed to the teeth. If you look at the objects that I have here, you can see that a lot of their equipment was very, very similar to the traditional armour and weaponry that was employed by the Sikh Sardars. But a lot of it was a lot plainer and simpler. It was there to perform a function. For example, they were equipped with similar firearms to the one that I showed earlier for the Sardars. This is a very similar kamar, the belt with the powder flask and the pouches for bullets, but it's in this far more sombre leather. In terms of firearms, contemporary reports suggest that they often had the same long arms, the matchlock muskets slung across their backs. But also within the Sikh army, we do know that occasionally they did use pistols due to the European influence coming in, although they weren't ever particularly widespread or popular. This is a pistol that came in with the East India Company gift in the 1850s, and it's supposed to be associated with the Akalis, but it's very European in form. The Akalis also often carried daggers. This is a katar, which is a form of punch dagger, which is pretty unique to the Indian subcontinent. The hilt has a crossbar here, which is used as a transverse grip. So the user would grip in such a fashion, and this would mean that the entire force of the locked, rigid forearm would be behind the thrust. For this reason, they're often referred to as punch daggers. The most famous piece of equipment that's often associated with the Akalis is the dastabunga, which is the quoit turban or the fortress turban. It's constructed so that it goes over the uncut hair, provides protection on the battlefield against sword thrusts, and it's also a very convenient place to store the weapons that are most associated with this particular religious sect. This particular dastabunga is equipped with 6 chakra. It also has a silver wire which provides extra security. It helps to keep the fabric in place and provides extra protection. And it also has these small daggers inserted. The other important element of the symbolism is the double-edged sword, or the khanda, which is incorporated up here at the top of the metal ornament. On the table, I also have a larger example of a quoit. This particular Dastabunga is one of the pieces that came over as part of the East India Company gift, so we know that it predates 1853.
Last week we learnt about the weapons and armour used during the reign of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, but today we'll be exploring more about who he was as a person. Bobby Singh Bansal, who has done extensive research on Sikh heritage, will be talking to us about the character and personality of Maharaja Ranjit Singh, where Dr. Jaspreet Singh is at the V&A Museum in London, and he'll be showing us some artefacts during the era of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. The V&A Museum is one of the largest and most prominent museums of art and design. It holds a permanent collection of over 4.5 million objects that span over 5,000 years of human creativity. Their collection includes many artifacts from Maharaja Ranjit Singh's era, one of these being the eminent golden throne he sat on during special occasions.
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Today in this series of Sikh heritage, we're at the Victoria and Albert Museum with myself, Dr. Jaspreet Singh, who is an art historian, and we're going to be exploring a few artifacts which belong to the Sikh Raj and how they actually came around. Now what we have to remember is during just post Sikh Raj, the British came in and they were there for about 200 years, out of which around 90 years they were in Punjab. They were open to lots of our riches, and a lot of our riches were bought, not just auctioned off to other countries, but some of the most exclusive riches were actually brought to England. Today at the Victoria and Albert Museum, one of our most prestigious and most valuable assets, not just to the Sikh Raj, but also to Victorian England, is the throne of Maharaja Ranjit Singh that you can see behind me. Now, tell you a little bit about this throne. This throne is made of gold. In its way, it's actually been here since around late 18th century. It was probably made in Lahore and was made by a gentleman from Multan. And what you see here is you see the opulence of iconographies of his Raj. Looking at the shape of the throne, what we can see is the lotus flower has a huge symbolic reference into this. The Sikh gurus also used the shape, the iconography of a lotus, saying that we're in Chikkad, we're always in this muddy water, this world around us is very dirty, and we're trying to make peace within that self. So that white, amazing white, seamless flower through this muddy water. Now this is also shown in Ranjit Singh's Raj, that even though all around him, around that state, we had this very horrible mass oppression going on, his Raj was very clean and everyone in his Raj was equal. So what we can see is we can see the lotus shape towards the top, but also the small inscriptions on the actual throne also shows us this amazing lotus. Looking at this throne, what you will see is actually, I'm not that much of a huge person, but the throne actually seems to be quite small. And this is quite interesting because when we think of Ranjit Singh, we think of Maharaja Ranjit Singh and this huge, in today's honor, we'd probably think of this guy as a huge 8-foot giant. But actually, in reality, Ranjit Singh was actually very small, and generally he dressed in very simple clothing. So when this throne, you can see that even though it's very small, the presence of this throne is, as you can see, very big. What you would find is historians have also accounted of the time that they've come to see Maharaja Ranjit Singh, and they've been a little bit disappointed because he was very pigeon-like and very mouse-like with his very pointy features, rather than what we would see today as this huge lion known as Maharaja Ranjit Singh. So in terms of throne size, it's quite interesting on how small it is. The next thing is the way the shape of this throne occurs. Yes, we've talked about it being a lotus leaf, but what we have to remember is pre-Ranjit Singh and all the other Maharajas would tend to sit on what we call a gaddi. So they would sit on a platform which would be raised by fine Indian fabric and also, well, fine South Asian fabric with some cushions which would be about yay big and would be round. That's where the Maharaja would tend to generally sit. And when you start seeing stuff like the other Maharajas from Patiala and also from Rajasthan, that's where they would generally sit. As the British started coming in, they started bringing these chairs. What you would find is that the Indian and predominantly the Sikh Maharaja were feeling a little bit left out because of the level that they were sitting at. So these chairs and these thrones were then implied. But what happened is they didn't find it comfortable sitting with their legs dangling. So what Maharaja Ranjit Singh, when you do see any iconographies, any paintings of Ranjit Singh, you'd find he actually used to sit in a cross-legged manner in the top of this throne. So this throne is a huge asset to the actual museum, but not just to the museum, as a form of actually understanding who Maharaja Ranjit Singh was, what he actually impiled in his empire, and how he would turn around and give us a scale of what he would actually look like.
So now we have a better understanding of what Maharaja Ranjit Singh looked like. Let's find out from historian Bobby Singh Bansal about how he was as a ruler.
Well, I think Maharaja Ranjit Singh does not need an introduction. I think we all know who he was. But let me just talk about his character, his personality. What was he really like as a ruler, as a husband, as a father? There have been many references made by foreigners, the British, the Afghans. How was Ranjit Singh as a ruler? And in a simple answer was, he was a very benevolent ruler. Secularism was his priority. I mean, we've got to remember this. He's a Sikh Maharaja at the court of Lahore, yet his administrators, his nobles, he's surrounded by non-Sikhs, Hindus, Muslims, who are at the forefront of his administration, where the Sikh chiefs were normally posted out to the far-flung provinces of the empire. Ranjit Singh held court with his devout and I suppose loyal administrators like the Fakir brothers. As a ruler, he always took care of the people, the citizens. Nobody went hungry. There are stories where he used to disguise himself as a beggar, and he would go out to the villages to give out grains and flour and everything. This is a person that where a Sikh temple was built, he would build 2 mosques, 3 Hindu temples. He took care of the people at heart, and I think that's why the non-Sikhs in his empire, they cherished Ranjit Singh. I think he was a unique ruler, always taking care of others before him. For him, it was the people first, and I think that tells you just in a nutshell what kind of ruler Ranjit Singh was. So benevolent, so generous, so kind. And the example of his kindness just shows you that on his deathbed, he was willing to donate the Kohinoor to the Jagannath temple in Orissa. This shows you his kindness and his generosity.
So Maharaja Ranjit Singh had a very noble and honourable character. So let's go back to the V&A Museum where Dr. Jaspreet Singh can show us more artefacts.
What we're looking at here is we're looking at a dastar from roughly around 1850. Now, when you look at this closely, what it shows you is the general formation of this has quoits on it. Now, quoits is the English word for chakkar, and this is heavily decorated, this chakkar is. What we do have here is you'll find that the decoration is all done with gold, and you also at the top of the dastar see some gold work embroidered into the muslin cloth, which in Alpha, muslin is another word for what in Punjabi, which is what we call malmal. So it's a very small knit, it's a very fine knit, and you can see the amount of work that would have gone to that to actually get a very fine knit work. In this, what I want to talk about is to what length we would do in terms of conservation. Generally, if we're cleaning something which is of Damascus steel or of roots material, we tend to use, in an everyday home, we will tend to either scrub it or maybe infuse that rust with lemon juice or citric acid. But in the museum, we're so careful on how our conservation is done that each quoit, what we would do is we would use a magnification microscope to look at each quoit, and every particle of rust we would pick off. So that shows that we would not allow any damage, as in we wouldn't rub anything on that to perform any damage to any of the gold gilded work. So each particle would be lifted off rather than smudged or rubbed along. So what we have here in front of us is what's known as a choga. In English we can call it a robe. And what's really interesting about these chogas is, as we would see when we graduate, we go and have our graduation ceremony. And there's a stagger there. If you've done a PhD, most universities will tend to wear a red bonnet, where if you're doing your undergrad, it generally tends to be a black one. But in this choga, what it does do is it's generally worn by people who are more noble. And if you look today, the Granthi at Darbar Sahib also has a choga on. The choga generally that the Granthi would wear would be made out of the same material as what their kurta pajama is made of. But the early iconographies and the early inscriptions of choge would actually have embroidered work showing what that person is actually capable of. So it would, in theory, have a little bit of his life on this. It's kind of like us today walking around with a shirt on with our CV drawn onto our shirt. So if you look closely, you can actually see all the small little embroidered pieces of information that person would have had. For example, if that person belonged to a family of farmers, you can actually see on this the early inscriptions of cattle on this choga. That person might have gone to a certain school, a certain akhada to learn their vidya, and that would also be shown on this choga. So even though that this choga itself is not a Sikh choga, what it would be is us Sikhs would have had, the noblemen of that time would have had choge of this kind of statue this kind of status to turn around and show the world what they would have been about and where they would have come from. So it's a really nice part of history showing that this is what Jogge would have looked like and how they have changed in the last 100 or so years to a very simple plain jogga. Okay, so looking at what we just saw was a jogga, I want to talk a little bit about the way we would dress. In front of us, we also have another jogga, which is a lot smaller. And again, it might not be Sikh, but we can learn a lot from this. What's really interesting is the way we dress, the way who we are, our identity is quite important on what we look like. Now, in today's day and age, when you see someone with a dastar, you can turn around and you say, actually, that's a Sikh. It wasn't as easy 100, 200, 300 years ago. And the reason for that being is it's because Muslims would also wear dastars, Mughals would also wear dastars, but it was the form of how we looked on what, I use this word a lot, and I use the word a lot in terms of iconography, but today's session is really about what we were and how we used to look. Now, in our form, in our Sikhi form today, we don't just wear something just because it looks good or it feels good. So when we look at the jogga and when we look at something like the churidar pajama, the reasons for why we would wear that is not for any form of vanity. So it's not there to show how muscly our legs are, etc., etc. So the jogga, if you see, has arms which are quite tight. And what would happen is these arms, again, would be longer and tighter as well. A very similar thing is a pajama, a churidar pajama, which is quite tight as well. And there's a few reasons for why this was worn and why it still is worn today. Number one is if a churidar pajama is made correctly, the pajama would be tight at the thigh and at the calf to press the right pressure point, stopping the legs going to sleep, whether it be in meditation, whether it be in battle, or whether it be in your daily life. What this would also do is, because the churidar pajama sits on the bone of the ankle, it stops it from gathering any dust and any dirt, which is a metaphor to show that actually all this worldly dirt that is around us, we don't need to worry about it too much, because as long as we keep our own peace, we can turn around and not worry about what's going around us. Jagat jalanda rakhle apni kirpa tar. So around us is always fire. So it's another small metaphor to show what a Sikh is. Today, if you are doing Granthi Seva or Kirtan Seva in a historical Gurdwara Sahib like Akal Takht Sahib or Darbar Sahib, you have to have a churidar pajama on, or you will not be able to, they will ask you to kindly wear one. So the iconographies behind what we wear and how we wear them is very important. Just like instructions were given that the stars must be 5 or more visible lar, just to show that size, so it can show us what a Sikh is. So if you come into the museum between any time now and October 2016, you'll be very lucky to see these amazing instruments that have been taken out of our underground collection and brought to see the day of light. We have a saranda, which has a huge significance to Sikh music and used to be played in the time of the Gurus, and also a taus, along with a few other instruments. So these instruments are here up until October 2016. So if you do come, please do come and visit these. So many times I get asked the question, is it actually worth having these artifacts in England, in the museum like we have at the V&A, Or should these amazing artifacts be back in India or in other private collections, or maybe some kind of gurdwaras and stuff? And my answer always is that having an artifact in a museum kind of makes it timeless, because what we do is the way the structure of the museum is, we have the best experts looking after these artifacts. We have the best experts in the world actually reading or understanding what the substance of the artifact is. And also, if anyone wishes to know a lot more about these artifacts, we have so much stuff available where people can just book a time and come to the museum and look at these artifacts in a closer room. What that does is it allows the artifacts to become a lot more accessible. I have a saying which is, we have to give our past a future. And what this does is, by having these artifacts and by having these amazing relics inside the museum, being looked after by a body like the Victoria and Albert Museum, it gives these artifacts a future. And it helps us understand a lot more on what these are. So by keeping them here, we're keeping our riches alive, and our generations and generations in the future can come to the museum and actually look at these artifacts and do more research on them. So it will help these amazing relics and our amazing rich heritage live for another day. So finally, what I would like to do is, I would like to ask the Sangat and the viewers of Sikh Channel to come and view the museum, and come and view the museum for yourself. Bring your families. The museum is free and it's open every day of the year, bar 3, but look at the website. Look at the website and see what's available, because when you do come here, there's lots of other activities for children, for adults, that you can do. Bring them and show them your heritage, show them who we are, and at the same time as learning who we are, learn who other people are as well. Learn about your history and about other people's history, because we read in Japji Sahib every day, Aaron Mat Ved Hatyar. Our best weapon is our knowledge. Try and learn as much as we possibly can. Thank you very much. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.